Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the EmbellishPod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on one, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at EmbellishPod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today, we're going to be talking about cork. And it seems a little bit tangential to what I normally do, but I think you guys are really going to enjoy this conversation and kind of maybe dispel some myths that might exist inside your brain around what cork is and how it's harvested and what it means for sustainability and spirits. This morning or afternoon or evening, whenever you happen to be consuming this particular podcast, I have Patrick joining me, and Patrick is coming from a part of the industry around spirits that I don't necessarily spend as much time around as I possibly should. So Patrick, I'm going to just let you tell us who you are and what it is you do, and then we'll kind of dive into the questions that I've got.
Great. Thanks, John. I'm Patrick Spencer. I'm the Executive Director of the Natural Cork Council. Natural Cork Council is an organization that is membered by the 6 largest cork companies producing natural cork from Portugal. And the organization runs on a number of different focuses. We work with quality of cork, rigorous testing and auditing of cork coming into the United States. We also work on forest conservation and projects to help conserve and preserve the cork forest in Portugal. And then we do a lot of media outreach, both to the consumer and to winemakers around cork and our sustainability programs, and why cork we feel is the best closure for both wines and spirits.
So, and I don't know too many kids who grow up saying, I want to lead the Natural Cork Council. So can you tell me how did you get to this particular role, right? Because this is, you don't get to be the leader of a council like this on a whim. There's a lot of experience and kind of career journey that gets there. How did you get here?
Well, I started out as a sustainability coordinator at one of the largest wineries in Oregon. And at the time, we were using 100% natural cork from our partners in Portugal. And one of the things that we wanted to promote more strongly was the use of Forest Stewardship Council, or FSC certified natural cork. And there weren't as many producers or farmers in Portugal who were FSC certified, and so the idea was to go to Portugal with one of our cork partners, meet with both the farmers, landowners, to talk about why FSC certification would be good. Also meet with the FSC to try to help them get more people to become certified. And like most people in America, I have to say honestly, I knew very little about cork. I knew that it came from Portugal, but I wasn't clear on how, when, where, why, what. And what happened was, when I went to visit the farmers, I was amazed by both the forestry aspect of cork and the harvesting, but also the cultural aspect and how integral it is woven into the fabric of Portuguese society. And I often say to people that I didn't choose the forest chose me. And so coming back, I became a much stronger advocate for cork. And then I was asked to lead an organization. I have my degree is in environmental sciences. I came back and left the winery soon thereafter to lead an organization called the Cork Forest Conservation Alliance. And that was a nonprofit organization that was working specifically on cork preservation, conservation, and reforestation projects. I did that for 16 years and decided to retire. And at that point, the members of the Natural Cork Council came and said, "I'm sorry, you can't retire. Uh, we don't know anybody who knows more about cork than you do, and we need you to lead the organization." And it was an incredible honor. It was probably the greatest professional honor I'd ever been given. And of course, I couldn't say no.
Mm-hmm. And so, ag practices or cultural practices, right? And it makes a ton of
Mm,
sense for you to kind of discover that journey. And I only know this just from my normal day to day job. It's interesting to kind of discover that. Now you mentioned a term early on in the answer, a term sustainability, and sustainability can have a lot of meanings within the market space for consumer products, for just about anything, and oftentimes it becomes a marketing term, but bringing in certifications is the thing that sort of helps to validate that you're doing sustainable
mhm.
practices in a meaningful way. Um, Tell me a little bit about what FSC certified means when trying to kind of bring the term sustainability into a real term as opposed to just kind of a thing you slap on a label so that way you can sell more product.
Yeah. So the Forest Stewardship Council is the largest forest certification body in the world. And essentially, there are a number of criteria that have to be met by landowners or forestry people to meet the FSC certified standards. Certification of non-using chemicals, reforestation projects. Um, it involves human action as far as employment and human rights efforts. So there's a number of criteria that any landowner or anyone who wants to be FSC certified have to meet. The interesting thing about forestry in Portugal, cork forestry, is that when the landowners look at the list of criteria needed to become FSC certified, they go, well, okay, well, I'm not using any chemicals. I'm hand harvesting. I'm replanting. My workers are the highest paid agricultural workers in the EU. We 100% of our product is natural and we absorb CO2. I mean, they meet all the criteria
Mhm.
for FSC certification. So it was a little bit of a hard sell in getting them to become certified because we needed to provide them a financial incentive to say, hey, listen, you can get more money for FSC cork than you can non-certified cork. And so that
Mhm.
sort of was it. But that FSC is the gold standard in the world of forestry.
Cool. So, and you currently work with and for the Cork Quality Council, and this council has been around. Well, sorry, you currently work for the Natural Cork Council, which used to
Mhm.
be the Cork
The
Quality
cork.
Council.
Yes.
It's been around since the mid '90s, and I think from what I understand, you kind of helped oversee that branding change. Can you maybe give us a little bit on maybe the reason for after
Mhm.
30 years we're going to pivot this and rebrand it? Does it bring
Yeah.
in something new?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. The Cork Quality Council was created during a time when uh, the quality of cork coming out of the countries, and Portugal's not the only country. There are 6 other countries that produce cork. But what was happening was the wine industry was expanding at a massive rate, as was the spirits industry. And with any product, there are people who are committed to high quality. There are people who are committed to lower
Mhm.
quality, and then there are people who have no commitment to quality. And
Mhm.
so, as a winemaker or a spirits producer, it's hard sometimes to tell whether or not you're getting good quality cork. No one's going to say, "I'm selling you bad cork."
Mhm.
Um, and so, what happened was there was a decline. I believe there was an expansion of growth in cork, and at that time there was a bit of a decline in the quality of cork. So the members of the Cork Quality Council, or prior to creating the organization, members got together and said, listen, if we build an organization that provides incredibly rigorous testing both in Portugal and once the corks come to the United States, if we test those corks for any issue, whether they be quality issue of the cork itself or any kind of chemical issue, any kind of problem, if we can test that and make sure that all corks coming into the United States are going to give our customers, and more specifically winemakers than spirit, because we obviously have a much larger population of winemakers. If we can provide winemakers with a credible understanding that the corks they're buying from this specific group of members is the highest quality cork they have, then we mitigate a significant amount of the problems of buying uncertified and untested cork. I think that was critical for the members of the Cork Quality Council. 25 years later, Portuguese cork industry has spent tens of millions of euros on learning where problems come from, both in the field, at the growing level, at the harvest level, and then following all the way through to production. And so now the problems that once had a bit of a caused a bit of a problem to the cork industry have been virtually eradicated.
Mhm.
And so now we're looking at a membership that says, well, listen, we solved the problem that we were formed to attack. Now what do we do? Now we're a group of six-member organization, and we've conquered this problem. What do we do? And so I think when the members of the Cork Quality Council at the time came to me and said, "What should we do?" I said, "Well, I think the biggest problem that we face is that 90% of the people in America, and under that umbrella, I will put both consumers and winemakers and spirit makers. 90% of the people in America don't know anything about cork. We've
Mhm.
not done a good job at telling our own story. And the 10% of the people that do know something about cork, 90% of what they know about cork is wrong. So we have another behemoth that we need to attack and eradicate, which is misinformation about both cork and the alternative closures that are challenging cork for the winemaker and spirit business."
And just about like anything, right? You spend enough time to kind of dissolve the problems that existed, only to unearth the new problems, right? Which becomes
Yeah.
an education and a perception problem. And you kind of teed this up relatively well. There's a number of options that exist in the marketplace for closures. So instead of saying like why not them, I guess maybe the question is why cork, right? Like what is the features and benefits of cork as a closure type, as opposed to something else. Because if I'm a producer in the United States, my cork is coming in on a ship from somewhere else. Is there something I could use locally that kind of shrinks my go to market time frame, right? So what is the advantage of a cork for me?
Well, I think that, let me take part B of that question first. I think that if someone is in the wine or spirits industry and they're using a closure that's not natural cork, that closure probably is not being produced in the United States
Mhm.
either. And so, we're talking China, Mexico, other, Europe. So I think that part, there's sort of a level playing field when it comes to, can we get enough product in a just-in-time factor? Yes, we can produce enough cork to provide every winemaker in America for wine closures for probably the next 50 to 100 years. So the quantity is not the issue. It is the quality of the product. I think sometimes we tend to forget that wine is, in the spirits world, it's really the only living spirit. I
Mhm.
mean, wine is alive. 20-year-old Scotch is 20-year-old Scotch.
Right.
It's never gonna be 21-year-old Scotch. If aged in that perspective. But when we talk about wine being a living product, we're talking about farmers, and we're talking about people who need a healthy soil, a healthy environment. Globally, we need a healthy environment for winemakers to continue to make quality wines. And I think critically, we've seen study after study after study that says, natural cork does enhance the flavor profile and the longevity of wines. That's not a question that can be, you know, uh, there's not a problem in answering that question. I think the other part of it is as farmers, winemakers should be looking at natural cork as, I'm growing grapes, I'm creating something from the earth, and now I've got a product that comes from a tree that's hand harvested, that's in one of the most critically important forest regions in the world. Why wouldn't I close my bottle of wine with something as natural as the wine that I've put in that bottle? Both from a quality perspective and from a consumer perspective. I mean, every study that we look at shows that 80% of the consumers in America are happier to pay more for a product that is sustainably sourced, that
Mhm.
has an environmental impact, that and all of the studies that have been done show that in the world of wine specifically, people prefer opening a bottle of wine with a natural cork in it.
Mhm.
There's not there may not be a complete understanding. It's almost subliminal. I think there's a natural sort of earthiness about you take a bottle of wine and a cork comes out. I mean, I'm not sure people can actually explain the experience, but it's internal.
It is far more romantic, without a doubt, right? Being able to pop a cork on a bottle of wine, and there's that little bit of the cork that has the color of the wine that it's been kind of
Yeah.
aging with or whatever, and so you've got this other aspect of consumption that exists, right? Because you've got the wine that you can look at, you've got the wine that you can drink, you can smell it, but now you also have this cork, which is a natural product that
Mhm.
has absorbed another natural product, right? And it gives it this whole other dimension for existence. And so it's very much more romantic than this synthetic stopper that has nothing to it. It looks like a byproduct of a factory, and maybe those are some of the attractive sides of it. But then there's maybe a secondary benefit. And if you wouldn't mind, kind of in reviewing you, I come across this TED talk, and we look through a number of things, and you already mentioned that there's probably enough cork for somewhere between 50 and 100 years of global wine production right now. But just the existence of the trees creates, the trees that you harvest the cork from, creates kind of
Mhm.
another layer of understanding and expectation on the benefits for it. And carbon marketplaces are kind of popping up all over the place within the environmental realm. So tell me a little bit about maybe the benefits for CO2 absorption or anything along that lines. It becomes the more like nerdy reason why you should also consider cork as the right answer.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, we have 7.4 million acres of cork in the world, and cork forests in the world. And what the beauty of the cork forest is that none of them are a monoculture. These forests all provide a number of different flora and fauna that
Mhm.
really add to the biosphere, um, and the biodiversity of the forest. And so you have these trees that absorb literally 20 million tons of CO2 each year. Um, the cork forestry is considered by every major environmental and forestry organization in the world as the most sustainable and low impact forestry in the world. You're harvesting bark off a tree that grows back and reharvesting the tree every 9 years. And so, what you have is you have a situation where you're taking all of the wood out of the forest, but you're leaving all the trees.
Mhm.
And trees that are harvested actually absorb more CO2 than those that are left unharvested. The cork forests have one of the most healthy honeybee populations in the world. And so many environmentalists have said, honeybees, if the honeybees go away, it's game over for human race.
Mhm.
There are over 1,300 species of plants, animals, and insects that live in the cork forest that live nowhere else in the world. So when you look at that sort of impact that the forests have, and then consider the fact that where cork grows, it's a very arid, low water table climate. And so those forests actually are the last firewall to preventing desertification in that part of the world.
Mhm.
As you probably saw from the TED Talk, cork doesn't burn until it gets to be 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's why it protected the space shuttle for 30 years, the fuel tanks on the space shuttle. So I think what we really want to do is think about, if we have an option between putting a closure on a bottle of wine that comes from mining, strip mining, and leaving devastation to the health of our planet, or to close it with a closure that actually reduces CO2, that is carbon negative, if you will, um, and reduces the CO2 impact of actually making wine. Why would we not use that just from an environmental perspective? And I often say, people say, it sounds like a great idea. And I try to tell the consumer, you know, we are an immediate gratification country. We love that. We want to give something and we want to
Mhm.
get something in return immediately. And I often tell people, there's no greater immediate satisfaction than buying a bottle of wine with a natural cork, because when you make that choice of choosing a bottle of wine with natural cork. When you pull the cork out of the bottle, you can look at that cork and say, I've just made a concerted effort and an environmental impact when I bought that bottle of wine because I'm helping to save those forests and the culture that lives in that forest. But my
Mhm.
immediate reward is the glass of wine in my other hand. So there's not much quicker uh, satisfaction that you can get than opening a bottle of wine with a natural cork.
Yeah. And you mentioned another bit of that is, opening a corked bottle of wine is there's a little bit of a ritual to it, right? Because usually there's
Mhm.
foil or some type of enclosure over top of the cork, and so you
Mhm.
have to have a tool to do it, and it gives you the opportunity. And you're right, America's a consumeristic society where we want things right away. But we have these moments where we accept things to slow down, right? It's just like hurry up and slow down kind of
Mhm.
moment. It's pour over coffee, it's Japanese tea, it's any a number of these things where you kind of have to take your time to do it, and so you're pulling the foil off, you're pulling the cork out, you're kind of examining it, you're pouring a glass. It takes a little longer than just like screw off a 2 liter and pour yourself a big gulp of Diet Coke. And it's it it
Yeah.
adds to, I think, the mystique of it all. There are some wines that absolutely are intended to just spin the top off, pour as much of it as in a glass, and then drink it down. But at least my experience, most corked enclosure wines are meant to be enjoyed over time, right? Like, this is not a quick consumption model.
Yeah, and I think that there's a little bit of um, there's a little bit of misrepresentation in the concept there. Just John, just bear with me. You know, a natural cork closure, 100% pure natural cork closure, is great for a bottle of wine
Mhm.
that you're going to age and that you want to have laid down for a while or that you're going to consume down the road. But we look at virtually 90% of all the wine consumed in America, purchased in America, is consumed within 48 hours.
Mhm.
And so winemakers are have shifted, especially in the United States. Winemakers have shifted from producing wine that's meant to be laid down for 5 to 10 years, as our European cousins do, still in France and Italy and whatever. There are some in America that still do it, but knowing that most of the wine is consumed, and that's somewhere under a $20 bottle of wine, and it's consumed in 48 hours,
Mhm.
there's no reason not to put some type of natural cork closure in that bottle, whether it's a composite cork, agglomerated, micro-agglomerated cork. You're still getting the benefits
Mhm.
and you still get the romance, but it can be a bottle of wine that was produced in 2024 and is meant to be consumed in 2025.
Right.
I once said to someone, you will never walk into someone's house and see a big glass jar on their coffee table and see it filled with screw caps. Uh, from memories.
Uh-huh. There, there's a similar big glass jar that's right here that's full of corks behind me.
Okay, there you
It does
go.
not have. You're right. It doesn't have any screw caps in it at all. And then there's this other concern. At least, I feel like it's starting to grow in the North American marketplace, where even if it is meant to be drank in the same year, there's this concern of you have this artificially created enclosure that has some form of either like a gummy substance on a screw top that kind of provides that seal, because metal on metal or metal on glass isn't always the best seal,
Mhm.
or they're creating an alternative to a cork, which is also going to be some type of a plastic based substance, right? And now I'm going to put alcohol up against it, whether it be wine or spirits. Um, is this leaching microplastics into me? Like, what's the concern? And I'm sure there's some education that you guys have to do around that as well. Like, are there health concerns over using non cork enclosures in things that might slowly dissolve plastic because of alcohol?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, a number of studies have been done to show that when plastic is exposed to any kind of solvent, there is a degradation of the plastic and there is leaching of those microplastics into the solvent. We have to remember that alcohol is a solvent, and so therefore wine and spirits are both solvents. Um, we don't have any long-term studies that show that. I know there was a study that was done in Texas a number of years ago that showed that, from a plastic wine closure, it was leaching microplastics, which were considered endocrine disruptors, and those endocrine disruptors were considered some of the culprits in breast and colon cancer. Again, that study was done, and I know it was peer reviewed, but I don't know that there's been any successive studies. But I think it's really interesting when you look at the history of, let's say, the plastic closure. We've gone from full-on plastic closures to companies who produce plastic closures trying to produce them from a plant-based ethanol from sugarcane, and now taking plastic out of the ocean and trying to remake it into a new closure. I think the bottom line is that plastic, there's a story that's spun about how that might be better, but the issue really is once plastic is produced, it never goes away.
Right.
Every piece of plastic that's ever been produced in the United States, unless it was burned, it's still here. Whether it is in its solid form or it's in its micro form, the plastics are still here. And I think that, when we look at the consumer base, when we look at a number of products that used to have, whether it BPA or other kinds of plastic chemicals in them, you've seen a significant shift. And I think you're seeing even a larger shift. People are becoming more aware of the health risks of plastic.
Mhm.
Does that suggest that we're going to get rid of plastic altogether? No. But if you have an opportunity to keep plastic away from a solvent where there is a risk, why wouldn't you?
Right. And there's I think you have the plastic story, which is being told by a number of other products that exist in the marketplace, whether it be BPA and tomato based acidic environments, or
Mhm.
alcohol solvent, however you want to look at it. But at least you know when I dove into this and started doing my research, and like my understanding of how cork farming worked was incredibly wrong. And I think you combat this on a regular basis. The more I looked at it, the more it starts to feel an awful lot like wool, right? You've got sheep
Yeah.
that produce wool, you shear the wool, the sheep still exists, the tree still exists. And I think my perception and understanding was that when you harvest the cork off of the tree is then going to die. And now we're really kind of burning through these trees super fast. And I've read other things that people thought, like, is cork coming from the bottom of the ocean? Are they cutting the trees down to harvest it? And none of that is true. But tell me a little bit about, how cork is harvested, and maybe like, what are y'all doing to combat, and educate on how cork is made?
Okay, so we'll start with A of the question. So cork comes from an oak tree. It's called its Latin name is Quercus suber,
Mhm.
and the cork oak takes about 25 years to mature from a yearling plant. And then once the cork becomes mature, the tree becomes mature. The first bark that's on the tree is harvested. It's called the virgin bark, and it's really not useful. It's a very mottled and it's just not a useful bark, and so that bark is discarded. Then we wait 9 years, and then the bark grows back. And the reason we wait 9 years is not for it's for the thickness of the diameter of the cork, not for the length of the cork. We need the bark to become as thick as possible. And this tree is only one of two trees in the world that you can actually harvest all of the bark from the tree. We have a term. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and one of the big terms up here is girdling. You can't girdle a tree, which means if you take an entire ring off the tree will die.
Yep.
The cork oak is the only tree that you can do that with, and with no harm to the tree. And then the bark then grows back, and we can continue to harvest that tree for up to 100 to 150 years, depending on the quality of the tree and the area that it's growing in. And so, that in and of itself is in a remarkable situation. And I think the other thing that people don't realize is that, there's no mechanical tools used in harvesting a cork tree. It's all done with sort of a medieval looking axe by hand. From really skilled workers, because if you're harvesting the bark and you cut too deep and you cut into the cambium layer, you can damage the tree and no cork will grow there. And so
Mhm.
you have a really highly skilled set of workers who do this. And again, I think I mentioned earlier, they are the highest paid agricultural workers in the EU.
Mhm.
And then, once that bark is harvested, it goes through a number of processes until it gets to the final facility where it's going to be turned into a natural cork. And what's great about there are two things that I always talk about with cork, and one is in cork production, there is zero waste. So if we're taking the bark and we're slicing it and we're cutting and we're punching corks out of it, the membrane that's left over, that membrane is ground up and can be used for a number of different cork products, including composite corks like champagne corks and other. But what's really interesting is the cork industry has learned that, cork, because of its elasticity, it doesn't grind like a really hard piece of wood. It takes a really specific kind of grinding machine to make cork into granules, and the dust that is produced from that grinding is then vacuumed up into containers where it's compacted, and then the factories actually burn that biomass to create up to 60% of their own electricity to run the factory. So when you talk about a closed circle
Hmm.
product, the cork has got it all. And then you have the social aspect of it, which is another story that I think we work really hard to tell, is that, being one of Portugal's largest exports and products, cork is woven into the factory fabric of Portuguese society. Any town that you go to near the cork forest, whether you walk into a baker or a grocery store or a clothing store or buying petrol, whatever it is, that money that's coming into those businesses is coming from that cork forest and from the cork
Hmm.
production. And so there's no separation between Cork and the Portuguese society, and preserving those forests is not only preserving something that's remarkably important to the health of our planet, but it's also preserving a culture that's centuries old, and it's part of that. It's part of the DNA of the Portuguese people, and it's critical.
And you used the term earlier, and my in-laws own a tree farm in West Tennessee where they do hardwood and pine, and girdling a tree is a real big concern, right? And so if you have a real layperson's understanding of how trees work, and then you see how a cork tree is the cork is harvested, you immediately assume the tree is dead, right? Because that's the only thing that we
Yeah.
know, and it is kind of this environmental anomaly that continues to exist after that. And longevity is a big deal. It's really impressive. Part of my brain also tingles in the back, when you get to the kind of the end of life for it. Is somebody making a barrel out of this that we can put some wine or some whiskey into so we can have some cork tree wine? See what happens there. If not, somebody should be doing that. That's maybe a different conversation for someone else. Um, it the the whole process is super interesting, and I think it's a thing that people can kind of latch onto now that they're able to think about the sustainability of it all. You're burning a dust for biofuel, and the biofuel is then going to emit carbon dioxide, which is then going to feed the tree, right? Because that's what they're going to consume, and that's one of the unique things about burning wood, is that it can help create more of what's going to burn again in the future.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna pull back a little bit from the Cork talk, and we're gonna go back to the Cork Council for a few minutes and make
Sure.
sure we give that kind of the attention it deserves. Now, you took over from your predecessor, and your predecessor kind of had looked over this for like 20 years or something like
Hmm.
that.
Yep. 25
Um,
years.
so as you kind of eased your way into this, and you're now what, 6 months into fully leading, 7 months into fully leading.
No, actually, on May 15th, I started my third year.
Okay, third year. All right, so there's my bad research. But so in your third year,
Sorry, no worries.
you've had an opportunity to kind of see what your predecessor did, and is there anything from the internal operation of what you're doing um, that surprised you? Right, and it's always tough to make strategic change after somebody's been around for a long time, because you're like, they did a good job, and I don't want it, but you kind of do your own thing because that's why you were brought in
Mhm.
to do it. So maybe some things you observed and some things you're like, here's some places where I want to make some changes.
Well, I think the previous executive director, a man named Peter Weber, did a remarkable job in bringing um, the technological aspect of testing, auditing, and producing and bringing cork into the United States, quality cork into the United States. No one could ever question the work that Peter did. He worked tirelessly to improve the quality of cork and improve the image of cork within the winemaking and spirits industry. I think, in going back to what I had said earlier, now that we've conquered the problems that plagued us back in the 90s, and we've the technology that the cork industry is implementing now. um, I one of our partners has more gas chromatography testing machines in their lab in Portugal than almost any other medical research facility in the world. And so you understand that they saw a problem, they needed to address it, and they did. And just the fact that you, as a winemaker or a spirit maker, you can go to any member of the Cork Quality Council or the Natural Cork Council and buy cork with 100% guarantee that there will be no problems with this cork. I mean, that issue has been, again, eradicated, and Peter was instrumental in helping that. But I think we came to a point where, it's almost like Dorothy. It came to the end of the yellow brick road, and now we're at Oz. Now what do? We made it this far. How do we change the perspective and the dynamic? And I think that, what I learned from our members was that their role in the world is to provide the best quality cork they possibly can to the American wine and spirits industry. What they are challenged by, and I think this is why I was brought in, was they were challenged in helping to both winemakers and maybe more specifically consumers learn about cork and to dispel all the rumors. Like, John, you went on a deep dive and you covered almost all the rumors. The cork trees are cut down. There's a cork shortage. We're doing to the cork forest what they're doing to the Amazonian rainforest. And so, I mean, I think those misconceptions were allowed to grow, unfortunately, because the cork industry had its head focused on eradicating the issues that had plagued it. And so it wasn't that they took their eye off the ball, but they wanted to address the large elephant in the room. And now the elephant in the room is, how do we educate people, and how do we get them to understand that their choice is critical to the health of our planet and to making a wise environmental choice. And always, from the wine quality perspective, we would never say that there's ever a better closure than cork. We don't talk to winemakers about their perspective, or spirits people. We don't talk to them about their perspective on what's best for their wine. If a winemaker wants to use an alternative closure because they think that's best for their wine, I would never suggest to them that they were wrong, because that's a winemaking or a spirit making decision.
Right.
But my job is to say to them, if you're laboring under some misconceptions, then please allow me to help you understand where the most environmentally prudent choice is. And then once you have all the information, if you make the decision from having intelligent, honest information and credible information on both sides, then you make that decision. We can't argue that decision. But what I think has been happening for too long is that decisions have been being made by the winemaking and the spirits community, and even consumers. As you mentioned, I've had people come to me and say, I was buying screw cap wines because I thought I was saving the cork forests. So, that's the thing that I looked at as the role of the executive director of this organization was, wow, this is a big task, and we have a lot of work to do.
And consumer and producer education is tough, right? Because most industries, or a lot of industries, at least smaller industries, have to focus on one or the other, right? You've either got to educate your producers or educate your consumers, and you can say, well, we'll educate the producers so they make the best decision, or you can say, I'm going to educate the consumer, because then they're going to pull it through from the producer and say, I require this to be a part of my process. But kind of a dual-pronged approach seems ambitious and painful at the same time, making sure everybody knows everything all the time. And part of me wonders, this is an agricultural product from another country, right? And I know, a handful of years ago, what the Scotch industry went under because of trade concerns or socioeconomic policies in the United States. Is that a thing that you guys are having to take care of as well? Is, making sure there is a championing for the cork industry and bringing cork in the United States, because, tariffs or trade deficits or whatever else exists in the world, you have to take this industry and navigate through here. How does that go, I guess?
Well, I think we 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 are lucky that tariffs are not isolated.
Hmm.
Tariffs are broad based.
Right.
So is it a great thing for Cork to be tariffed right now with the wine industry struggling as it is and the spirits industry? I mean, we're looking at, you know, consumption is down. Gen Zs are, not buying a bottle of wine every day. They're buying one every on Friday night or Saturday night.
Hmm.
Um, so it is a challenge, but I feel like we're not isolated in that challenge. And I think the beauty of Cork is that um, it can't it can't be grown in the United States from a financial perspective. Yes,
Hmm.
could you plant a cork tree in your backyard in Tennessee or Virginia? Absolutely, and it would probably grow. But the idea of this product coming into the United States as an agricultural uh, financial resource is never going to happen.
Hmm.
If you look at taking approximately 45 to 50 years before you can find out whether or not you have a cash crop, um, would be an investment only a fool would be involved in. Uh, there's a saying in Portugal which I really love, which is, if you want to invest in your children's future, you buy stocks and bonds. If you want to invest in your grandchildren's future, you plant cork.
It's fair. A lot of tree farmers kind of take the idea of, I plant a tree so my grandchildren can sit underneath its limbs, right? Because it's going to take
Yeah.
that long, regardless of whether it's 25 years for a cork tree or 75 years for a veneer or walnut, whatever it is that you're going to do. And one of the other sides of the conversation, at least from me as a consumer, as I think about, you know, is cork sustainable, and are these standardized practices? And you said something earlier that kind of triggered in my brain of these trees set at the edge of desertification, right? So
Hmm.
without these trees, we start seeing kind of more arid climates growing further and further. And so the regions where it grows, it really behooves them to take care of the trees, because if they don't have the trees, then they become desert as well, which is super not great. um, but it kind of also brought in my mind, that there's a lot of discussion around climate change and environment changes. Kind of as that happens, is that impacting the cork industry as well, as weather patterns distinctly change?
Yeah, I yes, it is. I can tell you that having been uh, three of the countries that grow cork in North Africa are Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria. And I've had the pleasure to be in all of those countries to visit their cork forests. And what I would say is that is where the rubber really meets the road. I mean, that's really where the real devastation is happening. I mean, you can walk to the edge of the cork forest, and the next step is sand.
Hmm.
And it's because those countries don't have the financial or manpower resources to help preserve those forests. And so that's why the efforts are so strong in Portugal uh, to work on what is happening with climate change. I know we are looking at, probably, I would say, over the last 10 years, it appears that with temperatures going up a bit, um, farmers are now looking at 9.5 to 10 years for harvest. The harvest is growing. The trees are growing a little bit slower now due to increased heat. But what we are looking at is the significant investment that a number of our um, partners in AppCore, which is the sister organization to the Natural Cork Council in Portugal. So between AppCore and the members of the NCC, um, working on looking at different kinds of irrigation situations and growing situations to help the cork trees mature faster, so that they can sort of mitigate this stunting growth during the early phases of the tree's life. If we can bring them to maturity a little bit faster and make them a little bit more hardy, they can resist that sort of increased climate change that's happening in that region of the world.
Yeah. And it I guess my next question is sort of tangential, but you've got kind of all of these efforts that are going on through education and through sustainability and all of this, and you're a council, right? So how do you operate, right? There's some revenue that has to exist to allow for you to do all of the things that you do. Like, how do you fund, I guess?
We are a membership-based organization, and our six membership members pay an annual dues to the organization. And then once every 3 to 5 years, we work with our partners at the Portuguese government and AppCore, which is the organization I just mentioned, and we provide some funding is provided both from the Natural Cork Quality Council members and the Portuguese government to create marketing and public relation campaign here in the United States. So we've done that a number of times, and that's been really helpful. I think that some of the efforts that we've made have helped move the needle in awareness. I think there's still a long way to go, and we have a campaign that'll be upcoming. I think it'll start later this year and run through 2027. But my hope is that campaign will really focus on. Um, I'm a strong advocate of focusing on the younger generation of
Mhm.
wine drinkers. I think the people in my age group and maybe a little bit younger, we love cork. We grew up with it. We know it. We may not know about it, but
Mhm.
there's a historical connection that we have. And I think when we look at the younger generations, this is their planet to save, and I think they have a greater awareness than maybe any other generations have had in the past about what's happening with climate change and the way the planet is changing. And I think our target should be on making them devotees and saying, we're committed to saving these forests. And again, if we can provide them a level of instant gratification where they can say, I did a good thing and I'm going to have a nice drink to go along with my good feeling,
Mhm.
we've won. And I think that helping to educate them and making them committed is really a core issue.
And responsible consumership feels like the kind of the anthem of younger generations, and I'll say
Hmm.
younger generations because I'm by no means the youngest generation that might be consuming alcohol. As much as it hurts to say, but we're at a time in the world where there's not been more information readily available for anyone to know.
Hmm.
But I think that the cost of knowledge acquisition is so low that very few people are diving deep. And so when you talk about educating a younger generation about cork, its sustainability, its value, its kind of place in the world, what are the avenues that you're chasing down to try to get the message in front of the people that need to hear it the most?
I think we're open to everything, and whether it be TikTok or Facebook
Mhm.
or Instagram. I think there are a number of different opportunities that we have not fully explored yet, um, to try to get this message to people. I think what this message has to be is it can't be doom and gloom. It has to be joyful, it has to be exciting, and it has to be a message that says, "I feel good about this message," and it's
Mhm.
fun. I've often thought that, having some influencers in Portugal who were part of the Cork community and who were on TikTok or Instagram or whether it be, whatever Facebook, whatever social vehicle works best. But having those people become influencers and having them become key people in a younger generation's world, that there's so much beauty and joy, whether it be food or wine or culture in Portugal. I think that having that kind of influencer can be really critical, to the younger generation to say, well, this is a country I don't know anything about. It
Mhm.
seems like a remarkable place. They make great wine, they have great food, and they make cork. And this tree is remarkable and unique in the world of forestry. So I was thinking about something that you said to me earlier when we were talking about the FSC and we were talking about, um, people not knowing much about trees. I was recently on the board of directors, the international board of directors for the Forest Stewardship Council. And it was a real honor for me to be part of that. And as a international board of director, there were 12 of us, and each one of us gets a chance to tell a story about where we would like the board to go for a board meeting. And it has to be obviously a country that's got forests and forests that are critical to the health of our planet. And when it came to my turn, of course, I said, well, we're going to Portugal.
Mhm.
And what I found really interesting was, we flew into Lisbon, and the next day we had a day trip out to the Cork Forest. And I was with long-term members of the Forest Stewardship Council, including the Director General and his staff, my other 11 board of directors, and ancillary staff around the FSC. And when we took them to the Cork Forest, it was almost as if I was reliving my first experience. These are people who have PhDs in forestry, forest engineering, who have been in forestry for some of them up to 50 years. And watching them watch the harvest was
Mhm.
like seeing kids at Disney World. Like, they were shocked. And I just thought, this is a perfect example of why the message is not being told well enough, and how we need to step up our game to tell
Mhm.
this message. If I'm surrounded by some of the greatest forestry experts in the world, and they've never seen a cork harvest, what do I expect from the American public? I mean, I need to give them a break, I think.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me, and you've probably seen this, but like the very first Jurassic Park movie where they take the professor out, and it's the first time he ever actually like sees a dinosaur in real life. He's been studying him his entire life through
Yep.
bones, and he sees one, and there's like a moment of awe. It feels like that, right? Like it's
Yeah.
entering an alien landscape where things that in your core about forestry don't work anymore, right? Like
Yeah.
it's in a different
Yeah.
environment altogether. And you know it is a tough thing to kind of wrap your head around for people that know what they're doing. And I think part of the messaging to a younger generation has to be a really creative mixture of really important and valuable and compelling storytelling, but also data, right? Because it feels like this a younger generation has some of the best bullshit detectors that exist, right? Like they can immediately sniff out if someone is being um, not entirely truthful with them, and then they
Yep.
have the ability to find that information like that now, right?
Yeah.
Because it is easy to access. And so trying to use all the tools in your belt seems about the right choice.
Yeah, I have a son who just and I've been playing soccer almost all my life,
Mhm.
and it's my sport. And my youngest son just got into it about 3 or 4 years ago, and he's become a really good player, and he's really into it. And I feel like I know a lot about soccer, but this kid came to me the other day and said, "Hey, I could tell you who has won the World Cup every year since 1930." I thought, okay, that might be a little bit deep into the minutia for me, but
Right.
it certainly speaks to what you just said about the,
Mhm.
the the knowledge that the younger generation has, and their willingness to go deep and dive into that knowledge.
And right, we're starting to push up on time, and I want to be
Okay.
aware of that. But a couple of, I guess, maybe a couple of forward looking questions for you, right? So you've had an incredible career. You sort of retired, and you kind of got pulled back out of retirement to do
Yeah.
what is important and valuable work. If you were to, look 10 years into the future, 15 years into the future, um, what is your vision for how this court council sort of exists?
I if I had, in a perfect world, John, what I would hope is that the Natural Cork Council would cease to exist.
Mhm.
Because what would happen is, not that I want to see the rigorous testing and auditing going away, but
Mhm.
the core companies the individual core companies are truly dedicated to this testing on their own, and they're triangulating the testing. And so I'm not worried anymore about the testing of
Mhm.
cork and the quality of cork coming into the United States. What I would hope is that there would be enough education where the the trend would shift away from an alternative closure, whether it be a screw cap or plastic, and that winemakers going back to natural cork in a much stronger way, where the health of the cork forests, and the industry that really has a great impact on Portugal's economy. Those things, what I would hope is that those things would be stable enough where I could say, okay, gentlemen, see you later, shut it down. We did our job,
Mm,
or maybe there's a new challenge. I don't know. But
right.
in my heart of hearts, what I would like to see is that this would, we would no longer need to exist.
Right. And it sounds an awful lot like you would like to do almost exactly what your predecessor did, where he took the previous version of this all the way to the end and solved the problems that were in front of it. You just sort of unearthed some new ones that needed some challenge. And I would suspect just about like any marketplace that will be the case. You could get
Hmm.
15 years from now, and the thing that you've set as the primary goal, the North Star, is achieved. But now there's another thing, right? And maybe
Yeah.
it is just simply existing for the rigorous testing, so that way independent, producers can independently verify the validity of the data they put out of the quality of what they're doing, right? Because sometimes I'm not going to trust the producer's reports on whether it's good or not, but I will,
Hmm.
trust a kind of a third party. But maybe as a slight adjustment to the question, what do you want your specific impact to be in the cork industry when you finally retire?
Um, I'd like I'd like the cork industry to think that this, well, quite often when I go to Portugal and I meet someone who I haven't met before and they know who I am, quite often the first question they say is, why does a man from Oregon care about the forest 7,000 miles away?
Mhm.
Like there's not an understanding. Like, I'm not Portuguese by heritage. I came to this later in life and through another job. But the question is always why.
Yeah.
And again, like I said earlier, I didn't choose the forest, they chose me. What I would hope is that at the end, the cork industry would say, Patrick spent 25, 30 years of his life trying to save our industry and to make people aware of why cork is so important. Um, I don't I don't look for accolades. I mean, I always say to my friends and family, I've never, since I've taken over 20 almost 20 years ago working in Cork, I've never woken up and not been happy to go to work or
Mhm.
not felt like I wasn't doing the right thing. So, what the cork industry thinks of me, I hope would be good, but what I think about myself is that I did the best I could with what I had, and I love this industry.
And there's I don't know that there's a more fitting way to end it there. It's very um very very honorable to kind of live that way and be able to work in an industry where you don't question the value of what you do day in and day out. Oftentimes a lot of us end up in those situations where it's just like,
Yeah.
this is the job that pays for the things that I like to do whenever I'm done at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
It's kind of nice when you can do both. So and we are kind of at the end of the time that I have available. So Patrick, thank you so very much for hopping on and have the conversation with me. I did get through most of my questions. I don't always get through all of them. Actually, most of the time I don't get through all of them. And that's always the sign of a really good conversation. And there's a really solid message here. So, you can't make any more time and you made some available to me. So thank you so much for hopping on and having the conversation today.
Well, John, thank you so much. The questions were excellent. I really enjoyed this. I really appreciate you making the time for me. So, cheers and best of luck.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using EmbellishPod, and you can give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com. That has all of my links, accounts, and contact details. Thanks for stopping by.